Hello and welcome to the third episode of What Happens in Marketing, brought to you by the Las Vegas Innovative Marketing Association. I'm Tom Heaton, president of Las Vegas Innovative Marketing Association, and I'm excited to be able to join you here in our third episode. If you missed the first two, make sure you go back and check those out. But we've got some great content for you here today. I'm excited to talk with our guest and be able to bring in some great insights on some new topics that we haven't talked about just yet. And so with that, I want to get into who our guest is. I'm really excited to be able to bring this author on who has years of experience and has been a tremendous friend to LVIMA and all of the innovative marketing associations around the country. He has some tremendous insights. He has brought in a ton of knowledge to our groups, and just from the opportunities that I've got to speak with him and be able to hear him talk to these large groups, I can attest that the ideas that he brings to the table are something that we can all learn from. So with that, I wanted to bring in somebody that he has a newsletter that's doing fantastic. It's something that's definitely worthwhile subscribing to. He is the author of the book, Restoring the Soul of Business and Staying Human in the Age of Data. And with that, I'll welcome Rishad Tabaccowala.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, really excited to have the opportunity to speak with you again here. You've done some tremendous work, and I am a frequent reader of your Sunday, the Substack newsletter that you send out. You've done tremendous work within that. We could probably talk for hours on some of the topics that you write about, but I wanted to really hone it in specifically on some of the topics that I think would be really relevant for the LVIMA audience that we've got. And one of the things that I heard you talk about recently is this ABD or ABCDE of marketing. And I wanted to focus specifically on the content side of things because you've been crushing it. I think first time I heard you talk, you said you might have been around like 15,000 newsletter subscribers. Your website has you at 25, and most recently I've heard you're at 30,000. So you're doing it right. How can agencies and media companies take that knowledge and take the insights from you to be able to jump into the game here?
Well, thank you. I think the three reasons why I seem to be resonating. The first is you need to have content that adds value to the listener, viewer, or to the reader. And it is primarily for them versus it being for you. Many agencies and people make the mistake of creating content that sells them, sells their company, or sells their services with sort of a veneer of providing actual content. And my thing is about how I can help people who read me, and it isn't about me. So it has to be about the audience and what they care about. Too many folks basically talk about themselves and they think that's what people care about. They don't. That's number one. The second is you need to have, in addition to the right the right content, you want to make sure that you make it very accessible. And by meaning accessible is the what I write. I spend 3 hours writing it on Saturday, but it takes you only 6 minutes to read on a Sunday. So I do a lot of editing, and Ernest Hemingway said, if I had more time, I would have written you a shorter letter. And I have time on Saturday to write 6 minutes. So I look at every sentence, I look at every single thing. And therefore, what I'm doing is I'm actually respecting your time. And what I'm asking for is 6 minutes of your time on Sunday, at which I'm giving you years of experience, edited over 3 hours down to 6 minutes. So that's the second one. Make it accessible. So one
Mm-hmm.
is make it relevant to me, make it accessible to me. And the third one, which a lot of people forget, is keep it interesting week after week. So many of us subscribe to newsletters where the writers, all of whom are extraordinary and have had great experience and expertise, eventually write the same thing again and again and again, right? They're like
Mm-hmm.
one trick ponies. And in my particular state of writing, I have now written 86 Sundays in a row on not 86 different topics, because sometimes the topics are the same but touch from a different region. But what I would basically say on at least 35 to 40 different topics, which means
Hmm.
nobody knows what they're going to get next Sunday. So if you make it relevant, make it accessible, easy to read, easy to digest, and make it interesting or surprising for what may come in the next Sunday. So everyone says, we wake up and we have no clue what you're going to talk about, because one day you're talking about dignity, the next day you're talking about the future of jobs, right? The
Yeah.
third day you're basically talking about wisdom. And it's like, who the hell knows what's coming next Sunday? And then
Yep.
to mix it up, I also design it in such a way that each week I introduce a new artist, a new photographer, a new painter.
Yep. Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. That's one of the other things I would add into that is you've got your three things that you do very well there. And then I also really appreciate the idea that I'm going to see some art that I may have not heard. Or I think we've talked about this in the past. You've got some jazz that I hadn't necessarily listened to, or in some cases, like, oh, I can't believe I listened to the same jazz that Rishad listens to. That's fantastic. Little nuggets like that, that I would go back to your first bullet of the idea that the content has to be for the reader there. And in that case, it's not just for the reader, but it's inviting the reader into your world and developing that one-on-one connection that really turns it into something that makes them feel like I'm sitting in the room with Rishad and he is giving me this knowledge and I feel like I'm, right there as a part of the community with him as opposed to just ingesting it.
It is. And what tends to basically happen is, if you will notice, and I've evolved this over the weeks and time, which is I keep also get feedback from people. So for instance,
Hmm.
I now actually do a little bit more proofreading, so I tend to have much fewer typos. I used to not do that. So people
I
say like,
always
"What's your
enjoyed those.
problem?" Right. And once I had a typo which was so extraordinary that people loved it. Right. It basically which I think I replaced like first with third or something like that, but whatever it was. So what is that? But the big two or three things that I've enhanced besides trying to make it less typo filled. So now I think I have less than a typo each week and nothing massive. But what tends to basically happen is, there are two big things to your point, which you raised or which you mentioned. One is I've actually removed myself. You will see in throughout the entire note, I no longer say I or you or we. It's like this. It's like I'm there, but I'm not there. So it's a true conversation, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
And the second is, though my topics change all the time and my artists change, my voice remains the same. So it's me
Hmm.
talking with you. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
and it's very much just, let's figure out this together. So it's not like me talking down at you, nor is me talking up at you. It's just like, hey, let's figure it out together, this together. So that getting the tone of voice right and getting the respectful note rights are very important, because this is what plays in someone's ear, right? And their basic belief is, oh, I like this guy, and therefore I listen to him or read him.
Yeah. Absolutely. One of the things you mentioned in most recent time, got a chance to hear you talk, is this revolution that's taking place. And you talk about how the media industry is being basically just revolutionized by, call it, voices that are coming from outside the traditional channels. I'd love to hear you expand a little bit more on that as we in the media industry and the agency side of things are fairly used to
Sure.
one set of rules. What's coming?
So obviously, the world will always have many, many things going on at the same time. But what seems to be on the rise are a few things. The first is, increasingly the quality of content matters a lot,
Hmm.
because there's so much content that people have to sort of decide that they are going to spend their time, which is the only thing that they have with like high quality content. And
Hmm.
high quality content tends to more likely come from people, A, who aren't forced to make page views, who
Hmm.
aren't forced to constantly print stuff so they can sell advertising against it, right?
Hmm.
And people who basically can take a point of view which might be provocative. And those tend to be individuals. And if you sort of think about it, that long time ago, the first major novels in the United States, like those put together by a Charles Dickens or others,
Mm-hmm.
actually were their, at that time, it was their substack, which is they would basically print weekly in the newspaper,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then they eventually actually printed little periodical little pamphlets. And then at the end of all the pamphlets being presented, they would be all bound into a book, right?
Yeah.
But if you think about every industry, it starts from one artist, one voice, one point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're going to go back to that. Now, there are people like Substack and others who are now trying to figure out one point of view is really great, but how do you discover and curate those points of view? So Substack now has a new app which is trying to do that, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually, I think it'll be each of us customizing and listening to having different points of view. And the big difference right now is you want an individual voice versus a corporate voice. Because,
Yep.
when people talk about authenticity and truth, if you look at who people are following, I'll give you a very simple idea. Okay.
Yeah.
Why is it that more people follow music stars than movie stars on social media? Right? If you
Yep.
look at music stars versus movie stars, it's
Mm-hmm.
massive difference in followership. And
Yeah.
that's because a music star is themselves. They sing, it's them singing. A movie star is an act,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And a movie star, if they're really good, you don't know who the person is, like Daniel Day Lewis, you just know all the characters.
Right.
You know, but a singer is a singer. They sing songs. You listen to
Yes,
those
it's
songs.
genuine. Yeah.
It's
Huh.
genuine, and so that's part
Yeah.
of the whole thing. Which you see that in an industry, and we forget that it's just like a genuine voice.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's a good thing for us to remember too, because a lot of times, even my experience working with brands, they want to create content and they want it to be from the brand. They want it to, basically say this company published this in
Yes,
this publication.
but yeah, and but what basically happens as well, the reality of it is all of us
Hmm.
recognize there is nothing like a company. A
Hmm.
company doesn't talk.
Right.
Uh, People in the company talk. And so what has tended to, and this is true, it's one of the reasons why when the CEO of a company gets into trouble, everybody thinks the CEO is the company, right?
Yep.
Because nobody else has put a voice forward, which is why I strongly encourage people, you can be a great media company, but with different voices. So the people who are trying to do that right now, they're doing it for a variety of reasons, including trying to make sure that they have direct control over the relationship, is what CNN is experimenting with CNN Plus.
Yes.
So if you think about CNN Plus, the characters on CNN the TV, which they can't run CNN the TV in streaming, because
Hmm.
if they run CNN the TV in streaming, then Comcast will say, "Wait a second, why are we paying you fees?"
Yep.
Right? So, but they want to be in the streaming world, so they created CNN Plus, which is 2.99 if you bought it this month for lifetime, but
Right.
per month, right? So, but in CNN Plus, almost everything is built around the character of their stars. So the same person is suit and tie version on CNN, and it's their real thing on CNN Plus.
Right. It's authentic. It's the authenticity that
Yeah.
you're paying for, essentially, the behind the scenes. And it's interesting because I think we're seeing a lot more other mediums outside of the news in basically incorporating the same sort of idea. You hear a lot about that from like the sports networks and the sports industries that we're seeing, whether it's the sports stars or even, I would say this concept has been born back. And I think about the old ESPN commercials and the idea of some of these behind the scenes things that really just it allowed people to think, or even if it was an act, just envision the idea of a Stuart Scott being behind the desk with with shorts on or something along those lines. And it gives that level of, hey, you know what, that's funny, and that it feels genuine. Having that now in an actual way where it is genuine and it really is more call it spontaneous, I guess would probably be the best way to look at it, and have that constantly created. I feel like that's a great opportunity for these brands. It's interesting because I think then a lot of brands, a lot of agencies are very quick to try to grip that back. And it becomes a very fine, delicate balancing act of how do you balance between the people that are basically becoming that voice and then getting them to sing from the same choir sheet, essentially, so that you're not necessarily going off brand. How do you recommend that agencies either coach their companies or the companies themselves get that cohesive brand without stifling the individual authenticity of the voices?
I think the way you do that is by basically making sure that people recognize that a brand is not necessarily, it could be a lot of different voices, but there is a genuine underlying tone or spirit that guides people.
Hmm.
So this is what I mean. If you actually look at truly interesting worldwide integrated advertising, right? So when many years ago, in fact, I talked with a gentleman's son. Many years ago, there was this very famous commercial that you may remember because not you weren't maybe alive at that time, from Coca-Cola called Mean Joe Green.
Absolutely.
Uh, right. So that was a very interesting
Yeah.
commercial, right? So
Hmm.
what Coca-Cola decided is what was in that commercial was the relationship between the young boy and Joe Green. So they went around the world and they didn't say, make me a commercial like that, right? They
Hmm.
said, in every one of your markets, there is a player like Joe Green in a sport, and then there is a boy or a girl somewhere. Find who that is and make that. So if you noticed, a traditional brand would have said, you need to have the colors and the graphics, and you need someone like Joe Green. You have to have repeat the same commercial. We'll put different
Hmm.
languages. This was no, the real idea behind that was the emotional connection between the two,
Hmm.
right? And so what
Yeah.
we're very good at is we're very good at directing pictures and words. We're very
Hmm.
bad at directing emotions, and it's emotions that we should be talking about, because you can have many multivariate places to an emotion. I always basically say, what is the voice of Picasso? It depends on the year.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That's very true. That's probably true of any artist, which is why, again, musical artists have a tendency to be more, I guess, attractive to this audience in this world now, because as they're basically reading you the sheets of their diary as their lives go on. And that feels very
Yes.
authentic. Yeah. Fantastic. Well, you mentioned earlier the idea of curating this knowledge, and I'm curious, how do you do that from your perspective? You talk about always growing, always learning. And I would love to hear how you take the information in the world, curate that down to a point where you're learning from the right voices and you know that you can trust the sources that you have.
The way I do it is in three formats. One is, as many of you may have read, and I mentioned it in my book, etc. I allocate approximately 60 to 90 minutes a day for learning, and
Hmm.
it's usually first thing in the morning. So the first thing is, in order for you to be able to connect dots, you need to see lots of dots. There, you can't write unless you read. You can't think unless you've gone through a lot of different things. So that's the first thing I do. Second is, I do this across not only a format, which might be words like on paper, which is like reading, but it's
Hmm.
across a lot of different things. So it could be I watch television, I listen to music, and then I say, in on a subject, what does a theme mean? So for instance, give you an idea, a simple form of curation. Something that we're all struggling with in many companies is, how do people come back to the office,
Hmm.
right? And I've written a lot about how people come back to the office. So that's like a theme. But once I have that as a theme, I try to rethink the entire world through that theme to see where else am I seeing things about coming back to the office from one step removed. Here's a show I recommend, and even if you don't have it, sign up for at least a day or at least a week to watch it. So it's on Apple TV Plus,
Hmm.
and it's a show basically called Severance.
Okay.
Okay, and what Severance is a very simple concept. It is, how do you cure for both life and how do you care for cure for work life balance? What
Hmm.
is it? What if you take a medicine that makes you forget about work when you are at home and makes you forget about home when you're at work, right? So you
Yeah,
severed your
interesting.
brain, you severed your brain into two parts.
Yeah,
And basically the question says, would you be better off if you could do that? And then what happens to the office part of your life? So it's not only asking that question, but it actually shows some of the quote unquote things we do in an office to give an office meaning. And
yeah,
when you saw that, it makes me even feel further convinced that coming back to the office 5 days a week for most people will never work, because that shows how crazy the office used to be. Because when you think about the office just as itself and you think about all the things we do at the office, it's like a religious cult.
right. Absolutely. Yeah, which I think is a great point to make too, that you wrote your book and published your book, what, about 3, 4 months before the pandemic, and yet in that you had the clairvoyance to talk about what we need to be thinking about for remote work for office workers. And it's fantastic to think that you were already one step ahead of that. I think you've done great work of being able to incorporate that into more of your talks and more of the content that I've read from you. Would love to hear more examples of how you see things changing with that world. And you basically, you talk about your curating your knowledge. I'd ask you, what's coming up next?
I would say that the big things that I've been focusing a lot on in is that we're on the cusp of what I believe is the third connected age.
Hmm.
And the first connected age began in 1993 with the World Wide Web. And we connected as human beings to transact and to discover. We call that search and e commerce. In 2007, we built on that and we entered the
Hmm.
second connected age where we
Hmm.
connected all the time and connected to everybody. We call that social and mobile.
Hmm.
We are now in the third connected age where the connections are going to be faster, which are like 5G. There are going to be new ways of connecting, voice, AR, VR. They're going to be data connecting to data, which is everything is going to be underlaced with machine learning. And there are going to be new ways of trust connections, of which blockchain is the big one.
Hmm.
And my belief is this combination is going to reinvent the future of advertising, media, marketing, and definitely content. And I
Hmm.
tell people to pay attention to Board Ape Yacht Club, because
Yep.
Board Ape Yacht Club is a combination of everything from a CRM program to the future of content, the rise of creativity, and a whole bunch of other things.
Yeah, I think that's a great example, and it's interesting to hear you talk about that and this concept of trust building utilizing blockchain. I think that's definitely going to be something that we're going to need to keep an eye on as we go into the future. We're constantly trying to be able to build trust with our audience. It goes back to your first point of being able to create content that matters to them. The reason why that's important is so that they can trust you as a news source, trust you as a voice that they want to listen to. And then all that comes to even the trust of the interactions, the data, and all of these other pieces that come into it. That's a lot for a agency or media company or any sort of brand, the enterprise piece, and being able to, as you called it, rather than being or only the paranoid survive, as Intel put it, but the be schizophrenic, not paranoid. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. So, one of the biggest challenges that all of us have as businesses is we have to balance what I call today and tomorrow, which
Hmm.
is if we don't deliver today, we won't get to tomorrow. But if we only deliver today, we might be irrelevant tomorrow, right?
Hmm.
And many companies have basically believed that paranoia, which is looking
Hmm.
inside, not trusting anyone outside, is the way forward. And this paranoia made Intel miss everything from servers computing to
Hmm.
mobile computing to cloud computing. right?
Yeah.
Because they were just fixated internally on the Wintel machine and they kept missing things.
Hmm.
So I don't believe the paranoid will survive. I believe only the schizophrenic will thrive. And schizophrenic means companies that focus continuously on two models, but they run two models simultaneously.
Hmm.
One focused on today to deliver the numbers and to fund tomorrow, and a tomorrow model which is customized to winning tomorrow, even though it might lose today and it might actually destroy today tomorrow.
Yes. A really interesting concept and hard for people to grasp, I think, too.
It's very so, but here's what basically happens. If you asked the CEO of P&G what was one of his biggest mistakes, one of his biggest mistakes at P&G was basically not to create a competitor to themselves, which eventually ended up being Dollar Shave Club.
Hmm.
So P&G had the idea of Dollar Shave Club before Dollar Shave Club did.
They
The
just.
idea of a direct, the idea of a direct to consumer, right? Lower cost, subscription based blade.
Mm.
But he said my mistake was I knew this was coming, but I didn't want to hurt my margins today because I make much more money by selling expensive blades through the stores, five blades, five blade razors.
Right.
And as a result, he fixated on today and he lost 18 share points and had to write down the valuation of Gillette by $8 billion.
I think that's a great, succinct way of putting it. Is
If on
you
the
think about.
other hand he had basically yes, but if he had basically said, I'm going to do exactly what I'm doing currently with my what I'm doing, but now I'm going to move some of my money to this team, and their team is to create the future of blades.
Hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
There would be no way the Dollar Shave Club would have come in, and those share points would have been lost to himself.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And everybody would have been happy.
At a lower margin, it would have been lost. Exactly, it would be bad, and that's what I mean by running two models.
Yep.
But what we make the mistake is so many companies, they basically say our future is really important, and guess who they put in charge of their future? People they don't know what to do with in the present.
Right. Yep.
Right. So as I mentioned yesterday, or when I
Hmm.
spoke, it's like basically saying my kids are really important, but I'm going to basically make them looked after by a crazy cousin who I don't know what to
Yep.
do with. Right.
Yeah.
And it's
Exactly.
things like this that we have to do. And so in the end, I remind people, if you think it feels stupid, it sounds stupid, it doesn't matter how powerful the other person is. If you've understood correctly, just tell them I think it's pretty stupid.
My last question for you would be is, as we have this group of members and everybody else listening in that may have these ideas, how do you bring them up? Or, basically, as you've put in your book and your writing here, how do you point out that turd on the table to the organization that may be looking at it as a brownie?
So there are three ways you do it. The first way you do it is you basically go to them and you ask in a way that sounds very differential because it's the right way of going by saying that thing that is looking brown and moist, maybe I don't smell right or I don't see right, but it looks like a piece of shit to me. Maybe I don't understand, right? So by
Hmm.
going in that way, which is differential, you might be wrong. It might actually be a brownie, so you don't make a
Hmm.
complete fool of yourself. But by going in and saying, maybe I don't see things properly, the person can say, oh, wait, I need to look again because you're seeing things I'm not seeing. So it allows them to save face.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
At the other hand, they may say, actually, you aren't seeing it from the right angle. Here's what I mean. And then you'll be fine. So that's
Yep.
one, going it with difference. Second is if you're a senior manager, is by asking everybody, can you tell us what is wrong with our current model? Please, people, speak up. I need people
Hmm.
to tell me what's wrong, right? So if you're a younger person, go with deference. If you're an older person, ask constantly for feedback about what's wrong.
Okay, that's awesome. That is fantastic. Rishad, you have given us a ton of knowledge. I love the ideas that you've talked about of just really creating this content that has value to the reader, taking yourself out of it, being it making sure that it's very accessible, and then really keeping it interesting week after week as you continue to do. It's been fantastic to hear that. And now the ideas of being able to go out and find new content that could be relevant to the ideas that you're having, being able to look at it in different ways. I definitely want to go check out Severance. Thank you very much for the tip
Perfect.
on that one. And then really thinking about, okay, if I'm going to take all this learning and I have a new idea, I love this concept of either being differential and giving yourself an opportunity to bring something new to the table without necessarily calling everybody out as, hey, that's stupid. Or being able to get that feedback and then being able to present that to everybody else. So, Rishad, it's been tremendous to be able to talk to you. I think we're running out of time here. I would love to keep this going, but I just have to say thank you very much on behalf of all of LVIMA and everybody else listening. It's been fantastic getting to chat with you today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Well, LVIMA members, everybody else listening, we have some more content that's going to be coming up in the next few months. Make sure that you're staying tuned to what happens in marketing. We're going to keep bringing more podcast content to you. We'll look forward to talking to you next time. I'm Tom Heaton. Thank you for joining us today.